Brewing Network.
All right, my name's Justin Crosley. I'm with the Brewing Network, and we're streaming all of these things live over the Brewing Network. You can watch this later at home if you doze off or anything like that, or miss any of the finer points. You can tell your friends about it. And most of all, we can wave to the folks at home and feel a little bad for them that they don't get to enjoy the beer we're having. So we have a great panel discussion for you today on beer scholarship. And if you're sitting in here right now, I already know that you're beer nerds like me. This is stuff that you're interested in, knowing more about beer and how it's made and how it gets into our glass. And I got a great panel with us here. I think the impetus for this discussion and kind of how we got started is this new publication edited by Garrett Oliver, and it's the Oxford Companion to Beer. And it's the first book of its kind, and I know he's worked really hard. Garrett Oliver there on the end, also from a Brooklyn brewery. And then next to him is Steve Parks. He's the owner of the American Brewers Guild. He's helping us out today. Next to him is Dick Cantwell from Elysian there in Seattle. Great brewery. And then right next to me is Horst Dernsbusch, who's also involved with the book. And he's with Cerevisia Communications. That's his day job, is what he tells me, when he's not just doing beer stuff, I suppose. So what we're going to talk about today is beer in academia and beer scholarship, and more importantly, kind of a lack thereof that we experience in the world, and how we change that. I was being enlightened by these guys about the difference between wine in academia and scholarship and beer, and that wine has really taken a different path than the beer world has in terms of scholarship. And I think we're going to discuss kind of why that is and how we can change it, and why it's important not only to brewers as they're making this product that we love, but to us as consumers and fans and the people that are out there preaching about beer day in and day out. So Garrett, why don't you tell us a little more about why we're up here and how this discussion started?
Well, the reason why I thought this would be an interesting discussion was really because, wait! As I went digging, when the people from Oxford came to me and they said, we would like you to do, the Oxford Companion to Beer, at first I said no. I said, there's no way I'm going to be spending this huge amount of time. I already have a huge day job, and I can't see how this could possibly be done. And eventually, when I they talked me into it. Believe it or not, they actually asked me to produce a book proposal, even though they had proposed the book to me. And so I wrote on a couple of topics, and I was shocked to find out that a few topics that I wanted to write about were not written down anywhere. I mean, for example, dry hopping. Now, we all know what dry hopping is. Out of 1,800 breweries in the United States, maybe 1,400 do it. Go out and find a book that tells you anything about how dry hopping is actually done in a brewery. And you will find there is zero. Absolutely nothing. How barrel aging is actually done in a brewery, almost zero. So much of our history in craft beer, being only 30 years old, is not written down and is not really available to the general public. And then again, also, when it comes to the past, when you start digging for things, you want to know what is porter, what is IPA. We have a lot of received wisdom that we've read in the same books. I'll tell you what, when you go out and you find a phrase about IPA or porter or something else, you find that everybody basically copied it from Michael Jackson. So if Michael Jackson had one bad source, that source moves down over 20 or 30 years. And that's not at all to impugn Michael's work. He basically invented the idea of beer style out of whole cloth, another thing that I didn't know. But the reason why this is important is that in the United States, even though the craft beer industry is bigger than the good wine industry, only 1 or 2 columns appear in the United States on a weekly basis about craft beer. Every major publication in the United States has a wine column. Why is that? What does that mean to you and your availability for craft beer? What does it mean to us as producers? And I think it means essentially everything, because the reason why they have that is because they have an academy of writers that work on it and actually do original scholarship. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about, where we get our information from, how much we want to dig for it, how much do we care what porter really was in 1820. I learned a lot, working on this book about that. A little hint, it was pumped full I mean, amazingly pumped full of drugs.
Wow.
You know, so I mean, which is fascinating. So as you learn this stuff, it kind of made me think. I mean, we have obviously Steve teaching professional people for the future. You know, we have Dick out there having written books and doing his level of scholarship, running his brewery. You know, Horst on 3 or 4 different levels, working on it. And we wanted to talk about it a little bit, see what the challenges are, and take a few questions. We only have a half an hour, so it'll be quick, but hopefully fun. So. Where do you want to run with this, Steve?
Well, first of all, there is a question mic right here
Justin.
in the center, so if anyone wants to come up to it at any time, we'll take questions from anybody if you have them. Steve, did you?
Well, echoing what Garrett says, we're here to learn. We're here to figure out what we can about beer. As an educator and a trainer of the next generation of craft brewers, which is a kind of revolving process, which is it's a responsibility that I've sort of taken on. I've endeavored to continue to present my experiences as a craft brewer growing up in England, and what I learned growing up in England and learning about beer was that drinkability is the answer. That we need to be producing beers that people enjoy drinking, and I've tried to endeavor to pass that on to the next generation of craft brew drinkers as well, and the next generation of craft brew brewers. So
Steve,
anyway,
my question about this and what the two of you have brought up, it seems to me that there's not a lack of beer research going on. It's happening in breweries, all across America, and the result is the different beers that we get to try here each year. But what's lacking is the real foundation and the writing about it and the materials so that a new brewer can come in and research those things. You pointed out, Garrett, that you can find nary a research about barrel aging.
Well, what's great now is that, I mean, really right now, in the last year or two, you can go into Google, and even though it might be creepy, it's unbelievable the stuff you can now find. I was going and digging on the internet and seeing pages, scans, of books from the 1700s and 1800s that had been scanned in 2 weeks previously. And what that meant was that this book from 1820, was in a library somewhere in England. My ability to see it in the past would have been virtually nil. And now, if you want to, you can go and read the book in its original form. And believe me, the things that you find out are pretty damn surprising. I mean, I know Pete Wells, some of you may have read his book, Hops and Glory, about India Pale Ale. And we all know the story of India Pale Ale. I've told the story of India Pale Ale. The fact of the matter is, it's not quite not true, but it's a lot more interesting and complicated than we've told it to be. And he's sitting there looking at newspapers from the 1780s and saying, well, actually, there were a lot of other beers sold in the Indian market, and we have the advertisements right here for exactly what was on the market at that time, and our idea of what was happening is simply not really true. So, the question I kind of have is, how much do we care what was true and what wasn't true? And I kind of do.
Yeah, I think that answers, or it starts. I think that starts to address what I was about to say, which is that every beer has a story. India Pale Ale has a fascinating story. It's endlessly fascinating to read these things, and of course, all of us who are here as brewers, out in the marketplace, everywhere else, we are creating new stories. We're creating the opportunity for scholarship, finding out what's going into the fashioning and the inquiry behind every new beer we make, and that just feeds us to find out what's gone for all the beer gone before us, with all the beers in the past with us or with everyone else. It's there's something behind IPA, there's something behind porter, there's something behind double IPA. There's a story that people are interested in hearing, and it just makes you look into the roots of everything and figure out where it all came from.
Why is it different with wine? Is beer the lazy man's sport, and we would rather do it and create it and drink it and not take the time to document what we're doing and do further research? Or is it more complicated and more difficult to have a beer academy than it was wine? Why the different turn? Why did wine go that route and we haven't?
I have one word for you. That word is money. You know, and one thing you find out, like if you go, I spoke at the Cape Wine Conference in South Africa in 2006. I was speaking about how to be a small producer in a world of large producers. The whole thing was sponsored by the South African government because it's a major business for them. You have never seen so much money in your life. I mean, everything, first class accommodations for 700 journalists flown over to South Africa, all taken on separate tours out throughout the countryside. You know, we don't have that. The history is written by the victors, and the victors up until now have been the mass market brewers, and the history of beer has been written essentially by them. Now, that means that when you read textbooks about beer and about the past of beer, there's basically only one story, and that story, by and large, includes us as a footnote. And so, you know, if you go back in other countries, you'll find maybe a greater digging of beer scholarship. So, you know, Horst in particular, you know, will have dug into the scholarship, you know, in his originally native Germany, and be able to pull out a lot of information on what beer built in the world and what it continues to build. So, you know,
yeah, what is the difference, Horst? Is there a difference in scholarship in Germany compared to here?
Well, let me start you out with a takeaway in the form of a soundbite. The greater the beer culture, the lousier is the beer scholarship as we understand it. Now, what do I mean by that? The beer scholarship in some of the greatest beer cultures in the world, which I think are Germany, perhaps the Czech Republic, Belgium, the academic beer scholarship is unsurpassed, highly esoteric, but it's also one of the best guarded secrets in those beer cultures because the general public is totally accustomed to the presence of beer. It's a visceral part of their daily lives, so they don't have to talk about it. I bet you Saudis don't talk much about sand, Inuits don't talk much about snow, and Germans don't talk much about beer. It's just there, and it's being taken care of by somebody. However, in this country, we are in a totally different situation because we essentially lost 2 generations of beer drinkers to the First World War, to Prohibition, to the Depression, to the Second World War, and to happy yellow fizz during the happy days of the 1950s. As a result of that, while Europe was coasting on its laurels, having made great beers for millennia, Americans became very eager. So our beer scholarship is much more democratic. It is addressed to the populace. That's why in this country you can have Draft Magazine, Celebrator, you can have All About Beer Magazine, and all those great websites. There is nothing like that in Germany or in much of Europe that I know. So if you think we are in a dry spot in terms of beer scholarship in the United States, both academic and popularized, like the Reader's Digest popularizes things. I tell you, Europe is a total desert. We are so far advanced compared to Europe, and that's why you have a real beer culture going on here, as well as the emerging beer writing culture that goes with this enthusiasm.
I'll tell you what, I have a challenge for a few people who are here. I read things like Beer Advocate every once in a while, and I see this OCD-driven interest in, like, on what day does some particular beer come out, and they're obsessing about the minutia of some new thing that you can't get, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you want the ultimate thing you can't get, you know, I hope that some people who are spending their time worrying about something of which there are 3 cases existent in the world are going to help do some of this digging. whether they get actually paid for it or not, because this won't happen, without you guys. If you don't go looking for these books, if you don't go digging into stuff from the 1700s and 1800s, we actually are never going to find the time to know our past. And if we don't know our past, we have no context, for our future. We can build a future, sure. But I'll tell you what, I'm reading a book right now, which is called The History of Champagne by André Simon, who's a very famous wine writer. He wrote the book in 1961 when he was 90 years old. And what's amazing is to see this book in 1961 just as fascinating as you could possibly get, with all this deep scholarship on every little thing that happened that created champagne today. And that's why champagne costs so much. Because there are books like this. Now, I'm not telling you that we're going to raise prices on you if you do scholarship. What I'm telling you is that, in order to defend the beer culture, in order to make it happen, the stories of our past, which are actually far more fascinating than almost anything out there, has to be dug for. And we dug for it in doing the Oxford book, but you guys, as you go out there looking at stuff, start looking around and see what's actually available to you. There are books available, from the 1800s that are literally scanned in from start to finish, and they are completely entertaining, and you have never seen this information before.
Yeah, hello, my name's Nate. I just finished the program, the Siebel Doman's program, and while I was over there, what you guys are talking about was what I was trying to dive into with my German professors is what is the Reinheitsgebot, and who governs the Reinheitsgebot, and how does it affect Germany really? And when we were over at school there this last year, I would say the last year when we were there saying, okay, can we brew an IPA? And the Germans were like, no IPA, it's too much. Then this last semester we went back there, and the school wants to brew IPAs. All the German students are now wanting to brew IPAs.
I understand the question.
So my question is,
I understand the question.
The Reinheitsgebot, we're talking about the rule of 1516, and how does it apply to the American craft brewing?
I can answer, either I can talk for 5 hours about it, or I can give you a very quick 20-second answer. The Reinheitsgebot is administered by the German lawmakers and bureaucrats. In Germany, the brewers have handed over the definition of their own product to lawmakers and bureaucrats, and they are idiots. They know nothing about brewing. Therefore, they have ridiculous regulations. They call it the purity law, but it has nothing to do with purity. That's one problem. The German brewers are very obedient. They obey the law. And when you talk about IPA to the Germans, the brewers say, we can't make an IPA or a stout because the public doesn't know it, they will not drink it. You talk to the public and they say, I don't know what an IPA or a stout is because nobody makes it. That's a vicious circle, somebody has to break it, and a lot of breweries in Germany are now starting to look at us to learn what we are doing, and some of them are very progressive, and they're actually in the process of changing the German beer culture. And in 2016, there's going to be a rewrite of the Reinheitsgebot because it's 500 years old, and there are a lot of interests working on revising it so that Germans too can make the beers that we make, and I am sort of a little bit involved in helping them doing that.
All right, well, I was going to ask one more question, but you just answered it for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I was wondering, when you're doing the research for this book, what, for each of the four of you, what was the most surprising thing that you found out during your research about beer?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I'm sure you could get a long answer from everybody. I was particularly fascinated by porter, because porter was kind of central to the world of London, in the 1800s, and the porter brewers were first to take on everything, every new innovation, every new steam engine, every new everything, refrigeration technology, roasting technology, etc. As soon as it was even vaguely proven, they were in front of it. But we have an idea about, in the past, things were better. In the past, things were purer. In the past, porter was pumped full of drugs. And so you have this guy in front of the parliament basically telling them, I could read it out of there to you, but you probably wouldn't quite hear it over the din, testifying that we have to keep the drugs in porter, particularly Cocculus indicus, which contains a toxin, that really wipe people out. And they said if we were to use enough malt to produce enough alcohol to get the same effect as this poison, essentially, our profits would plummet. So we have to keep. That's what people are coming back for, is the drugs. We forget that the Coca-Cola, the Coca in Coca-Cola was cocaine. I mean, that the old days were not necessarily pure, but because they were not pure, they were entertaining and fascinating. So when you read this stuff and all the things they put in there, all the adulterations, chili peppers to give you a warming sensation to make you think that something that was 3% was 10%, et cetera, et cetera. Craft brewing in the United States right now is probably the purest thing that has ever happened in the world of serious beverage, including by far the wine industry, which is rife, especially at the top end, with all end of adulterations. I mean, all sorts of stuff, things they got a 95 from Robert Parker. You can be pretty sure, they have been all kinds of stuff poured into it to make this cocktail, for people. And if we can't tell people about what we're doing and why, we're different, we don't have a past. Again, we can't tell people who we really are.
So we're running out of time. If there's any other questions, please feel free to come on up. I thought maybe you could just help me put a finger on exactly what's missing also, Garrett, because clearly there are beer publications. There are beer schools in our country, some great schools, the American Brewers Guild, the UC Davis program. So it's not that we can't enter the world of academia and learn about beer. It's not that we can't go pick up a beer magazine or any of these publications, certainly a brand new book. So what exactly is missing that will help us move forward to a beer scholarship world that you're talking about, Garrett?
Well, I mean, I think it's weird that the biggest beer writer in the world, the most influential beer writer in the world, is Eric Asimov, who is the chief wine critic of the New York Times, because he publishes maybe one beer column every month and a half, but it reaches millions and millions of people. Do we actually write to newspapers, any of us, anybody, and ask for a beer column? Do you know that, when wine writers write a single beer column, that is the biggest traffic in email and whatever else they're going to have in their entire year, always? And the reason why, we don't have this is it's kind of a vicious circle. If you guys aren't asking, hey, why don't you guys get a beer writer, then it doesn't happen. So, I'd like to see that happen. I want to see across the board. I mean, what kind of you do things like a pumpkin festival. I mean, when you wrote a great piece in the book about colonial brewing in America, which I thought was fascinating, and you've done some digging on it. I mean, what are the things that really surprised you the most about what our forefathers in the United States did with beer?
Well, I mean, part of it is not surprising at all. They used fermentables that they didn't have to import from England, that they didn't have to pay for, and that didn't support the mother country from which they were in the process of seceding. But what I've found most surprising about some of those colonial brewing techniques is how popular they are today. People are really interested in having people step out, do new things, and this sort of ties in with telling the story to people. Brewers are busting to tell the stories of what they do, and I think consumers are very, very thirsty to hear the stories and drink the resulting product.
Steve, what do you find the students want to know about the past of brewing? Do they just want to know the technical past and how they're going to brew in the future? Or do you find there are people there who really want to dig into the background of what they're getting into?
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of interest in the past of brewing. Essentially, everyone coming to the school is training to become a professional brewer. So they have this sense that they want to learn as much as they can to make themselves valuable to an employer. But what makes them valuable to the employer isn't just their beer knowledge or their knowledge of the scientific techniques of brewing, but also their enthusiasm and their passion for brewing. And so what we're finding is we're sending out a number of graduates every year that not just have the technical knowledge of how to blend malts and hops together to make great beers, but also the sense of the history and the perspective that of where they belong in the history of beer, and that's our job. We're not just teaching them how to make great beer, we're also teaching them where they belong in the history of it.
Before we get too far, I just want to tell you something about the beer that you're drinking. This beer that you're drinking is actually kind of based on the book. It's called The Companion. It is a wheat wine. It is 9%. It is re-fermented in the bottle with champagne yeast. It is made from 100% floor malts, both floor malted wheat, which hasn't been seen in the United States for 100 years, and floor malted barley. Wheat wine is a type of beer that was widely made in the United States, by even Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. What's fascinating is you can go read Thomas Jefferson's letters to James Madison talking about his brewing, talking about the wheat wine that he's making, and asking James Madison, if you're done with my brewing books, can you please send them back? And to read this correspondence is fascinating. I mean, we kind of know, the founding forefathers brewed, but we don't know what they talked about, how much they brewed, and how deeply they were, into it. So I just want to say before the question here, I saw a cartoon once where there was an Italian kid and another kid, and they're talking to each other. It says, well, my family came over from Sorrento in 1920, and my grandfather came into Ellis Island, and then we moved apparently into the Lower East Side, and then into Brooklyn, and part of my family split off to Poland, whatever else. And the other kid said, well, first we were on Maple Street, and then we moved to Elk Street, and now we're on Pine Street. And I kind of feel like in the beer world, we're almost living like that second kid, when our history is actually more like the first kid.
Hi, you guys might have touched on it a bit before, but I was just curious about specifically like culinary schools, and I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a stage, and just how is that being used in American brewing? It seems it's more of an old world practice, but is it still in use today? And basically, how would people get in contact with that?
I think it's very much in use today. I mean, I think that Steve's school uses a form of that, and Steve can talk about that. Because we have so many people who want to work in the brewery, or think they want to work in the brewery, I should say, we have a policy that we only will take in interns who have subscribed and are involved in some sort of professional brewing education. They basically have to have made a commitment, both monetary and time-wise, to brewing, because we cannot take the time to teach dilettantes, who are not going to go out and brew for the public. It's very, very hard to have somebody underfoot. I mean, I know they mean well, they want to help. They cannot help. Not a single one of them can do anything but get in your way. And so it's the same with a stage. Somebody comes into your kitchen, that's somebody else you have to make sure doesn't get hurt, doesn't get killed, and you have to also pass along some knowledge. So I think that the idea of that happening is super important, and Steve does it all the time.
The idea of an apprentice who has some kind of formal training before they actually show up at the brewery, I think is crucial. I think there's too much at stake in a brewery these days to leave things to chance. The enthusiastic amateurs, great. We all love that, but some degree of professional training is important. So the enthusiasm is what you want, but some form of
we've got time for one more quick question.
And I'll make it quick. We all know the role that drinking plays in our lives, and that it makes mundane situations exciting. It makes ugly people attractive. What do you think the role of beer drinking is in our culture, and what's the importance of consuming alcohol in day-to-day life, and why is it important?
That might be a long answer.
Well, all I can say is that after 9/11, a few months after 9/11, I was in England, and I was giving a talk to the British Guild of Beer Writers. I was their kind of guest, and I kind of talked about what an emotional experience it was to live through 9/11, and how much more, I appreciated beer, and how much more I appreciated the pub, because the best times that we have in our life, many of them are spent around a table, or spent around a beer. And Americans in particular make the least time in their lives for the opportunity for the things that are most important. And how do you expect to have, you think back to some of the best times of your life, I promise you, there was a beer in front of you, for a good many of them. And, you kind of learn hanging out with the Italians, etc. You need to spend time and arrange your life in a way so that you can have more of those moments. And, I always say, well, beer, it's not brain chemistry and it's not rocket science, and maybe it's not the most important thing in the world, except when it is. And that's why I think that means something to us, because, beer kind of is the most important thing in the world, the fellowship that it brings. And I know the wine people. I hang out with them. I hang out in their circles. I know the cocktail people. And, they all have their great things about them. But there is more fellowship among us and in this room than those guys are ever going to see. And that is what makes, beer special.
In short, wine is a feudal drink. Beer is a democratic drink.
All right, that's about all the time we have. I kind of wanted to say, I was thinking of something, somebody I used to work with while I was listening to you guys speak up here. He was a baseball broadcaster. His favorite thing to say about baseball was that it was a talking sport, and that's why we listen to it so much on the radio. And I really think that beer is a talking sport. It's how brewers learn from each other, not from the textbooks that we're talking about are missing. It's how I interview brewers for a living. It's how home brewers learn different techniques. But I would really hate for it to just be that, and to miss out on a lot of the history that I think you're talking about is missing, Garrett, and to be like that second kid. If I could only say, well, I went to the GABF in 2007, and I went in 2008, and IPAs really grew during that time. And if that's all the stories that I had to pass down to my kid, or all the academia about where IPA became popular, I think it'd be sad for brewing. So I think you're absolutely right, and I hope that we take it upon ourselves to do something about it and to start doing the research necessary to write this down and be able to pass it along. Oh, hang on, you're
Go write books. Go write books. We need more books. We need more blogs. I mean, you know how few beer books there are that come out every year? I mean, really? You go and look at the shelf. It's pitiful. It is absolutely pitiful. And why? Where's ours? Where the hell is ours? Those of you who have who have any passion for it, I mean, get out there, damn it, and go do it.
Also, most writers drink, so we've got the last half covered.
All right, thanks, guys. And thanks for the writing that you do, too. The brewing, the writing, and sharing that with us. We really appreciate it. Thanks to Garrett and Steve and Dick and Horst here. Thanks, guys. And thanks for sitting with us. We appreciate it.
The Brewing Network.